I'm Dr. Tosh Warwick. I'm the Community Engagement Officer for the Middlesbrough Heritage Action Zone. The Heritage Action Zone project is trying to bring new life into Middlesbrough's historic quarter. It's a former commercial heartland of the town, and it's the key historical buildings, the institutions, the railway station, all of which played an important part in shaping our town. Here I'm in the strong room of the archives, and as part of the project we've been working collaboratively with Teesside Archives, looking at ways in which we might make the collections more accessible to the wider world. We've digitised new material, we've spoken to members of the community, used oral history material, and also uncovered some hidden gems within the collections. The Heritage Action Zone includes buildings such as Bell Brothers Webb House, designed by the celebrated architect Philip Webb. It includes Middlesbrough Railway Station, extensively bombed during the Second World War, and also is home to one of Middlesbrough's oldest pubs, the Zetland, as well as the Port Authority, the home of Henry Bulko and John Vaughan in the Cleveland buildings, and was also formerly the home of the Royal Exchange Building, one of the grandest buildings ever to be built in Middlesbrough, which was demolished in the 1980s as part of the A66 construction through the heart of the town. The Heritage Action Zone project is looking to change perceptions of the area and re-engage people with this important part and space in our town.
My name's Ruth and I manage the archives here at Teesside. The archives are collected by all institutions and also by people, by families. So they're the records that are created in the course of day-to-day activities, and they can be very, very varied. Our main function is to collect the archives created by the 4 Teesside boroughs, so Middlesbrough, Hartlepool, Redcar, Cleveland and Stockton as well. So we do cover quite a large area, and we will collect the records that they create as well as the records of local businesses, local families. So I can give you some examples. So we've got the British Steel collection, which is our largest and most prestigious, including things like the plan of the Sydney Harbour Bridge. And British Steel was made up of large firms that are well known around the world, so Dorman Long. We've recently got new material from Cleveland Bridge that are the successor company to Dorman Long, but also ICI, Headwrightsons. So there is a wide variety of material that relates to industry. But the archives also represent local families. So, for example, the Pennymans, the owners of the Middlesbrough estate, as Middlesbrough grew as a town. And where we're sitting at the moment was the centre of the commercial district. So we had the Royal Exchange outside. You could see outside the statue of Henry Bulko, and the major offices of the firms, all the business that was conducted, banking, that type of thing. We do also have other materials, so there are lots of photographs here, there are oral accounts. There's a wide variety of materials, sort of anything you can think of, we will have it. And one of our major collections are building plans. And we've got a brilliant collection of building plans because Middlesbrough grew as a town really from the middle of the 19th century, which was when they brought in planning laws so that you had to record what you were building at the time. So there's a great record that shows the development of the town. And for the purposes of the Heritage Action Zone, that's really, really helpful. So working with the Heritage Action Zone, we're working in collaboration with Historic England, and they're very keen to know about the history of the buildings, how they've changed over time, the people that use them, and the development that's gone on. And as you all know, a lot of them are listed buildings now, including the Archives' own building. The Archives are collaborating with Historic England to work on the Heritage Action Zone, which covers Exchange Square and Zetland Road back towards the town centre. So those buildings, many of them are now listed, have had different uses over the years. Occasionally they've fallen into disrepair, and we have of course seen the A66 built through the middle of the town, which has had a big impact. But hopefully now the fortunes of Exchange Square are going to improve, and we'll see these buildings being regenerated and hopefully coming back into use. It is the centre of the town, the original historic commercial area where all the business of the town took place. The Royal Exchange outside, which was demolished in order that we could build the A66. And you can still see traces of the Royal Exchange in the stone heads that are out in Exchange Square today. We're hoping that this project will enable us to develop new audiences, because we will reach people in different ways. We've done a lot of digitisation in order to help facilitate this project, especially when you consider the current problems we've had with COVID. Reaching people in new ways is very important. It also means that you're not relying on people to come to any physical location to be able to access your collections, and that makes a huge difference. People already engage with us from all over the world. We get researchers visiting from Japan. We get people from Australia. So our audiences are very varied. But in terms of a project like the Heritage Action Zone, you're going to attract people who are perhaps local, and they might engage in different ways. So we might consider things like walking tours, or developing resources for schools, or for use with different community groups. So there's quite a lot you can do in this sort of field.
Hello, I'm Lara, the archivist. I'm in one of our strong rooms, which holds the British Steel collection here at the archives, and the British Steel collection is all of the records to do with British Steel and its predecessors such as Dorman Long and the Bell Brothers. A lot of the plans and photographs that we hold here have been used as part of the Heritage Action Zone, as the Bell Brothers building is within the Heritage Action Zone, and Dorman Long's head office was also the Royal Exchange buildings. The plans I'll be getting off the shelf today are actually for the Royal Exchange. They're the original plans from the 1800s, and they're kept in a flat portfolio to keep them safe and from getting them curled. Here at the archives we have over 1 million documents, and that can be photographs, documents on parchment, documents on paper, vellum. We also have thousands of negatives and films, as well as other digital records such as CDs and DVDs, floppy disks, and a lot of digital records such as PDFs and Word documents.
Hello, welcome to the Conservation Studio at Teesside Archives. I'm Helen Kendall, I'm the conservator for the archives. There are two sides to my job. One is preservation and one is conservation. So the preservation side is more of the protection and the safe storage of documents. We have many types of container and wrapping that helps to protect the documents for the long-term future. So we have acid-free boxes and also acid-free envelopes to put documents in. And then sometimes I make individual boxes for photograph albums and other books. And then we have thousands of rolled maps and plans that are usually rolled up and put into these acid-free boxes. I also use a lot of archival polyester, which is an inert kind of plastic that's not going to damage the documents. Photographs and documents are put into these as well. So this collection here is of negatives from the 1950s and 1960s, covering the centre of Middlesbrough and the Heritage Action Zone area. One of them is a royal visit from June 1956. Unfortunately, the negatives are starting to deteriorate, and they have a problem called vinegar syndrome, where the negative is deteriorating through being stored poorly in the past. So I'm now protecting these negatives by putting them into individual sleeves, and then the whole collection is going to be stored in a very cool, dry atmosphere to slow down deterioration. And of course we can digitize a lot of these negatives. Some of the best images of Exchange Square, Albert Road, Zetland Road can be copied from this collection. We have thousands of plans, building plans, that relate to the centre of Middlesbrough, the Heritage Action Zone area, as well as the other 4 boroughs. This is a plan I have here that has been stored in various places through the years. It has signs of dampness here, and it is very fragile, but it's a very important plan for the project. It's the original plan of the railway station in Middlesbrough, and it's signed by the architect, and he's up here, William Peachy, and this is dating from the mid-1800s. This plan is very fragile. It has been copied, but it is very fragile, and I intend to do more work on it. The actual consistency of it has a linen lining and then a paper lining, and then the actual plan is a very thin tracing paper, which allows very fine drawing to be done on the surface. Unfortunately, the tracing is very brittle, and these little cream areas are where we've got pieces missing. It's actually flaked off. So my plan is to try and clean it, surface clean it. So I use smoke sponges, which just get the surface, I very gently go along the surface to remove surface dirt. And you can see the amount of dirt that can come off using one of these. I also use vinyl erasers as well to lessen the dirt around some areas. And then I use light, soft brushes to brush that debris away. And when then I focus on the areas, the tracing where it is lifting. So I use various different tools. I have a very thin palette knife, which just helps to lift the piece that's already loose. And then I can use a very fine brush with a tiny bit of adhesive, a clear adhesive, and I can just place a little bit underneath the flake and then press it down with a silicone paper and a bone folder onto the surface, and that re-adheres the flake to the lining. It is a huge job, so only the worst bits will be done, but we want to safeguard this plan for the future. It can never be replaced. So it's one of the documents are worth spending a lot of time on and conservation work time on. I have an example here of before and after of the many books that I rebind, and this is a register from Clarence Ironworks pay records 1874 to 1875, and these are directly connected to Bell Brothers, whose headquarters are in the Heritage Action Zone. So this book has been in this state for many, many years, and we know that people would be interested in the contents. So I've started work on it, recording how it's been put together. That's the recording I do, and also take photos as I go along. But this is the state it's survived just, but it needs cleaning. Every page probably needs some kind of treatment to it, and I will move on to the middle of it to show the very worst. This has a lot of information about the people that worked at the ironworks, so it's fascinating for relatives and anybody doing research. So this is the kind of dirt and tears that I come across in books. When I finally get to the point where I need to repair and infill with new paper, I choose a paper that matches as close as possible in texture and thickness. So I have a selection of handmade papers, sometimes machine-made papers, and Japanese tissues and papers as well, to create the best repair, but not a bulky repair. This is the finest tissue I use, which once it's put down onto the paper, you can barely see it, but it does support the paper. So all those repairs do take a long time, but once the paper is repaired, then I can re-sew the binding and put a new cover on it, and a similar style binding to the original. So this book here is also to do, this is North Skelton Mine Wages Rate book, and this has been rebound using goat skin, archival goat skin on the spine and corners, and book cloth on the covers, and then inside we've got new end papers, and there again these pages were badly damaged by mould through damp, being stored in a damp place. But it has survived now, and because it's been rebound, people can look at the documents and the information safely within. I sometimes do gold finishing on the leather if it's appropriate for that book, but the basic conservation is all to do with making sure that the paper is stable enough for people to handle it and to look at the information in the book.
Hiya, my name's Michelle. I'm an archives assistant here at Teesside Archives. I provide the frontline service here. Customers contact us via email or telephone or social media to see what we have, see if they can book appointments to come in and view our items. We can identify things on the catalogue that we have that they can come in and see. And we retrieve everything from our storage rooms for their visit. They use the items and records for research. They're allowed to take digital copies for further use. We can provide copying services, either paper or digitally. We have a dedicated scanner and software system for that purpose. While they're here, we can check our catalogues to see if there's anything else we hold that will broaden the research. We hold a lot of things people aren't aware of, workhouse records, education records, hospital records. Gosh, there's all sorts we hold that people aren't aware of. Well, this helps them, especially if they're doing family history or local history, they get a broader picture. In our search room, we hold a lot of local maps, which people like to look at and use for their research. And we hold street directories, which people find very interesting. So the street directories we hold people use to plot the histories of the houses, which is very popular at the moment. And we also hold old planning applications from the 19th century. So people like to get a copy of the plan of the original house when it was built. We hold lots of local history publications where people have already done the research. We have paper versions of our catalogues for people to access, because some people don't like to be digital. As well as the records we hold, we offer PC access for people doing family history, where we have access to Find My Past and Ancestry, and a lot of our records have already been digitised and uploaded to those sites. There's lots of free sites as well that they can use.
So this plan that I got out of the strong room earlier is one of the many plans and photographs that have been digitised as part of the Heritage Action Zone partnership. These plans, as I said before, are the floor plans for the Middlesbrough Royal Exchange that was demolished in the 1980s. You can see from the plans that they're very fragile. The digitisation process enables us to make the plans more accessible to a wider audience in the future, as well as preserving the originals from being handled by the public.
Hi, my name is Chris Corbett. I am the Community Engagement Officer here at the Teesside Archives. And it is my job, as it says on the tin, is to engage the communities with what we've got actually at the archives themselves. So we're all about getting the archives out into the community, using the resources in lots and lots of different ways. I mean, the Heritage Action Zone, the High Street Heritage Action Zone has been brilliant because it's enabled us to digitise a lot more material than we currently have, which obviously makes it far more accessible because then people can get online and they can actually see it rather than having to physically come into the building itself. So basically, the kind of thread I think we're looking at really with the Heritage Action Zone is what we do, how we record buildings, because obviously the Heritage Action Zone is all about buildings. We've got some incredible old buildings here. It's the historic commercial heart, the beating heart of the town. You know, it was the first thing that you saw when you got off the train, which in the 19th century was your main way of getting into the town. So it was a real statement piece, all the buildings around here. And so we're looking at kind of the different ways in which the archival material helps to record those buildings. So for example, we've got lots of plans. Obviously, I think Helen's been looking at plans in the earlier piece. We've got lots of historic maps showing the development of Middlesbrough and how Middlesbrough grew from quite small beginnings and obviously took over all of this area. We've got a lot of photographs, and I've got a few of them laid out here. Some of the best ones are actually from the planning collection that we have, CCPL, which is a fantastic record of all the different buildings, all the different detail. But we've also got some really nice personal collections as well, because the archives isn't just about official records, it's also about people's own personal collections, which are just as important. And we've got some really nice little Polaroid snapshots of the area from the 1980s. So it kind of shows you that this area, people were really proud, have always been proud of Middlesbrough and its heritage, and they wanted to record it before it disappeared, really. So it's quite a nice story in itself. We've got lots of publications, we've got books, you know, that date from, you know, the 19th century, early 20th century, that are basically showcasing the town and saying, look what we are, and look what we have, and look what the buildings mean to us. So we've got some really nice material in there. And it's also, the story and the history of the town also comes through our oral histories and the stories that we actually have, you know, people's personal memories, because at the end of the day, these are just buildings, but it's the people who give them life. So whether or not they were kind of a commercial property, whether or not they were lived in, became residential, you know, that's the story of the building, how it kind of evolves. In terms of, particularly in terms of community engagement, what I intend to do is I intend to take out the Teesside Archives on tour, and I want to take it out into the community and show people these images, show people these photographs to help trigger their memories and their anecdotes and their stories, and how, you know, the personal connections that they actually have with these buildings. And particularly in relation to school groups, the Historic England, who obviously part fund this project, have got these wonderful resources looking at heritage at risk and encouraging the children to adopt almost like a particular building and to make a case for keeping it. Because obviously we've got a lot of buildings who they no longer serve their original purpose. You know, we've got banks which aren't banks anymore, they're kind of more offices. And how does an old building evolve to kind of keep up with that particular development and that story? Because old, you know, buildings, when they become empty, that's when they start to deteriorate. So we really need to repurpose them. So the children, they have to gather their information. You know, we want them to come out and take photographs, do sketches. We want them to do some research online so they can find out what those buildings were used for, what they're used for now, what they could be used for as well, what the future actually is, and to empower those young people to feel proud of their heritage and to feel pride in the town where they come from. Because I always feel, in terms of heritage and history, it's by looking back we can actually look forward and move forward and develop.
The Heritage Action Zone, or the High Street Heritage Action Zone, is effectively a conservation area that's been designated by Historic England as at risk. And basically what that means is that they feel that there could be more input and more funding into the area. And there are a lot of empty buildings, unused spaces that they feel could be better used to enhance the area. So the High Street Heritage Action Zone is a funding stream from government, about £95 million, that's being delivered by Historic England and local councils. And I think there are about 70 high streets across the country that are using that funding. Middlesbrough is definitely one of them, yes. Yes, it's quite a large conservation area, and it's got lots of fantastic heritage buildings. A lot of them are underused, and effectively this is an area of town that people don't know that well or don't come into as often, and that's what we want to increase. So we're trying to get the funding from Historic England to be used by building owners to enhance these buildings, get them better used, get different uses into them. So Middlesbrough is like a lot of other towns, and then in many ways it has a lot of differences as well. I've done a lot of work in Newcastle, on the historic buildings in Newcastle, but also working in Bishop Auckland, Darlington. So every project has its own merits, has its own character. So quite often you'll treat each project in its own right, and it has its own character. The Heritage Action Zone is centred around the station. The conservation area used to be the station conservation area, and then it was merged with another one to form the historic corridor. And alongside the funding and the rejuvenation of the station that's going on at the moment, the Heritage Action Zone is putting funding into the buildings around that area. I was only appointed sort of 6 months ago, so I'm still getting used to the area and learning the history myself to some extent, but my work so far has been centred around Exchange Place and the buildings around here. We've got a couple of buildings on Zetland Road that we're looking at the moment, but certainly the buildings that front onto Exchange Place at the moment are fantastic. This one, Commerce House, and the Zetland buildings just along the road. But there are so many, so I'm still expecting to find quite a few. Yeah, so from my point of view, I'm a conservation architect, and protecting old buildings and protecting important places is my focus, but I think it is a focus of a lot of people. Future generations are going to need to appreciate these buildings and can learn from them, so that's why we need to get these buildings back into use and focus on putting a new use into these spaces and revitalising the high street. And then the other aspect is carbon reduction, which is obviously the very focal point of current thinking. Basically, if you reuse an old building, then it's quite often cheaper and more environmentally friendly. Historic buildings contribute so much to urban centres. They are quite often the underlying character of a place, and a lot of people will visit or spend their day-to-day time in the centre of a town, and the memory that they take away will be of the buildings and the spaces that they've been in that are surrounded by buildings. So they have stood the test of time, and quite obviously becoming derelict and is not looked after. It impacts more heavily on a space and more detrimentally on a space than if you've got a building that's well looked after. And it's very quick to change the impression of a place if a building is not looked after. Well, I touched on it a bit really. Heritage building owners, they buy their buildings to run businesses from and use as housing or offices, but equally it's their role to look after these buildings and protect them for future generations. So you can have a building owner that contributes and looks after his building, and it's guaranteeing its future. So really, it's, as I touched upon earlier, it's being a custodian of that particular building for future generations. Within the Heritage Action Zone, I'm currently lucky enough to be working on Spenceley's, which overlooks Exchange Place, which is a former bank, and a bank manager's house as well, which is quite interesting. So at the moment my focus is on that, and that's quite special. What I did read recently is that Zetland Road is what's interesting is it was built between in sort of a 38-year span, so it was kind of, I think it was Deltic House in the middle, which was built in 1868, I think, and then Zetland Hotel, which is next door to it, was built in 1890, so sort of 30 years spans the age of that street, so it's quite interesting. What I like is that they're so varied, so you can go into an architectural practice and design a new office or a community space or a school. It could be any number of uses, and you can very easily get into a situation where you're designing the same sorts of buildings over and over. What I like about conservation buildings is that they can be an old building and they can have any kind of use. So we have a lot of conservation projects in the office, but the use varies. There could be a care home, there could be use as part of a school, it could be an office. So every project is literally different. So you get every historic building is different, but then the use is always different as well. Yeah, quite often people will think of historic buildings and think, you know, they're not very exciting, but for me, from an early age, I like to know how things were put together and, you know, how buildings were built, and I always seem to be drawn to the more, you know, a lot of kids have drawn the castles and things like that, and I was always drawn to how these things went together. And whether that was the reason I went to study architecture, I don't know, but it was, what happened was that I ended up going through and doing my degrees and kind of fell into it. So I got a job in Newcastle for a company that happened to do quite a bit of work on churches and historic buildings, and it just seemed to sort of pique my excitement, shall we say, and it was what I was interested in. So then I did some more study and worked on those buildings, gained more experience. And what I like is that they're so varied. So you can go into an architectural practice and design a new office or a community space or a school. It could be any number of uses, and you can very easily get into a situation where you're designing the same sorts of buildings over and over. What I like about conservation buildings is that they can be an old building and they can have any kind of use. So we have a lot of conservation projects in the office, but the use varies. There could be a care home, there could be use as part of a school, it could be an office. So every project is literally different. So you get every historic building is different, but then the use is always different as well.
We hope you've enjoyed this tour of Teesside Archives, and we want members of the Middlesbrough community to learn more about our heritage, rediscover the Heritage Action Zone, and learn more about our past, present and future.